If I could just teach my kids 3 lessons about money, this is what they would be. Number 1 is to be an example. Now, for a lot of you, that might sound obvious, but you might know or may not know that when people talk, words only represent like 7% of what people retain. Body language, actions, and tone actually account for so much more. So for me, I always decided that I was going to bring my kids into the business. I was going to show them from the ground up how things are done. So from the very beginning, my kids were trashing out units, painting units, helping on the maintenance. They were asking questions about how the whole thing works, how cash flow works. One of the best tools that I used when my kids were little were the cash flow games from Rich Dad Company. As Maria Montessori from the Montessori School says, what the hand does, the mind remembers. And so the kids would play the board game and they would start to learn concepts inside of the board game, no different than you guys probably did when you played Monopoly or Life or whatever it was. So for us, we used to play cash flow. And in the cash flow games, there's 2 things. There's the rat race and then there's the fast track. And of course, it's a game, so the kids just think that they're playing a game. But one of the things they had to do was fill out a financial statement as the game progresses. And there's all kinds of things that happen when you're playing that game. So the game is just merely producing examples. And so out of that game comes lots of discussions, and then you can tie that back into real life things that I'm doing. And so that's how I started getting them into my business, just starting to understand these kinds of things. And I can remember when they started taking accounting classes in high school. And my son came home and he said, I was the only one in class that understood what an asset and a liability was, and of course what passive income was. I was the only one. Most of the other kids were lost. And it was all just because of playing that game. So what I mean by lead by examples, I actually brought my kids to certain projects so they could actually see and ask questions. So they were asking, how much did this cost? How much cash flow did it have from the game? How are the expenses and how does this whole thing work? And it all boiled down to the same thing. And that is that you use other people's money, or OPM, just like in Monopoly, and you go buy assets. In the case of Monopoly, 4 greenhouses and 1 red hotel. It's really the same process each and every time. And so once the kids start to understand that, they started to apply it to businesses and all kinds of other things where they basically could use other people's money to finance what they're doing. I'll give you a couple examples. My younger son, Cade, when he was about 10 years old, he wanted to buy a knife off of Amazon. Of course, probably like all of you, you can either fund that or say no. In this particular case, I said, how can you find out how to get that knife for free? So we started talking about it. Again, just basic principles. And the knives were $30 each. Or so what he came to the conclusion of is that he could buy 4 knives. He could sell 3 of them for $40, even though they were $30. And he would sell 3 for $120, which would buy all 4 knives. In other words, for $120, if he got 3 kids to buy the other 3, as an example, he would get the 4th one for free. And this is all I'm talking about. It's just having those basic conversations. Because when you give a kid money, or when you give somebody a fish, they can eat for a meal. But when you teach them to fish, they can eat for life. There are learning lessons each and every day, and these kids are sponges and they'll figure stuff out. When I say lead by example, it means that I was communicating with my kids at all ages about what I was working on. Properties I was buying, properties I was building, things I was doing to try to grow my business. They were part of those conversations. I'll never forget when my older sons graduated from high school, he asked if he could come into the office, and he started to dig through all our operating agreements. These are all the legal agreements on all the individual deals. And he started to look at the waterfalls of cash and how each deal is structured. And this is when he was 17 years old. It's all a result of being fully transparent and talking to them each and every day around the dinner table or lunch or a weekend about things that you're doing and leading by example. Number 2 is teaching my kids how to barter. Now, barter is not using money to be able to move yourself forward somehow. And it's quite simple. If you think about it, this is the way everything started. Before currency, people used to use things to barter. And that is essentially how the economy was built initially. Think of, you own a cow, you produce milk, you use that milk to trade for food. That's barter. There's no actual money exchange. So when you start to think in terms like that, you can really actually teach quite a bit, because everything has some kind of value. It might even be a service that you can provide. So for example, I brought my kids to a barter convention, and there was one guy that said, I'll give you one gold coin, one real gold coin, for 1 hour of mentorship. That's barter. That's 1 hour of my time for one gold coin. And that happened right in front of my kids. The whole purpose of barter, of course, is to take something and recognize the value of it and trade it for something that you want. So one of the greatest videos that you can find on the internet, and I made my kids watch this and study it, and then we discussed it, is called The Red Paperclip. And in this video, which went viral, and it's years old now at this point, is there's a kid that takes one red paperclip and he keeps trading it. He trades it for a pen, and then he trades it for a knife, and then he trades it for something bigger. And he traded it all the way up for a house. He traded a red paperclip for a house. No money exchange. And the whole thing is you just find somebody that wants what you have, and then you trade up. It's a famous YouTube video, and I had both my kids watch it, and then we discuss how it all works. This is way easier than sitting across a kitchen table and trying to teach them on what you do, because now they watch something and they're engaged. And so there was a period of time for a couple of years where I had my kids doing the exact same thing. So I said, go out in the garage and find something of value. It doesn't really matter what it is. And they went out and they found some stuff, and they started to trade. And the next thing you know, they were having fun, and they would put it on Craigslist, and they would put it on eBay, and they just kept trading and trading and trading and trading. And the rule was no money exchange. And my older son did that, and he made several trades, and he eventually even got wheels and tires for the car that he was trying to buy when he was 16 years old. So, and then I personally did that, where I actually had a rental, and one of my renters was having a tough time, and he had an old Firebird that was sitting in his garage. And I said, well, I see that you can't pay rent. What about that Firebird? And so we had an exchange. He traded me the Firebird for rent. Of course, now I had a Firebird, and then I had my kids work on that actually and upgrade it so that it was worth more. And then I took that Firebird and I gave it to a handyman who renovated a unit for me. So all of that happened from the rent. The Firebird was just a means of value. And the guy who renovated the place, and it was about $15,000, $16,000 worth of work, he got a free Firebird that I actually got for just a few grand of rent. So that's what I mean by barter. One of the things I always wanted to do with my kids was have them in the right rooms with the right people. Proximity is everything. So whenever I would go speak, or maybe just even attend a conference, I always tried to bring them, because I always wanted them in the right rooms with the right people. These are folks that are speakers, they're into personal development, and they're really trying to make themselves better. And that's actually who you want your kids in the room with. This year I'm hosting Limitless. I would highly encourage you bring your kids to this event. I'll have mine there, and a lot of people will. And what you really want is you want your kids in the right room with the right people. So what's one weekend a year to put your kids in the right room? So I hope to see you at Limitless this year. Your kids are going to get an invaluable education and things that they'll never see in school. I'll see you there. The third one is just to start a business, and this is when it all comes together. So I owned a house up in Idaho on a golf course, and what I used to do when the kids were about 8 and 10 years old is I would go out on the golf course at night, and we would go out and find golf balls. And that's how we started, because in their minds, every golf ball was worth $1. And they would go pitch them out of the water and all kind of stuff. Every night we'd get 20, 30, 40 golf balls, just depending on where we went. And we'd come home, we'd clean them, and then the next day, they would sell them all for $1. And so just by living on the golf course and just by teaching these lessons, what happened is they kind of got obsessed. Every night they wanted to go out, and they started to get a little more daring and started to understand a little bit more where these golf balls might be. And so then they would clean them up, and they started to understand that everybody that lived in our neighborhood had a certain golf ball brand that they wanted. And so they would clean those up and they would just bring them over to their door. Like my next door neighbor invented the 5-hour energy drink, and he played with Bridgestones as an example. So all the Bridgestones, they would clean up and they would just go over, and he would pay $20 for 20 balls. And they started to learn that, and they started to do that all over the club. And then after a while, they would go to the clubhouse and they would look at the golf shop and see how they were priced. Then they would go to the stores and see how they were priced. So they started to learn about branding and pricing and all that kind of stuff. But the smartest thing they ever did is they would go up to the club around 6 or 7 o'clock at the end of the day after all the golfers were done, and they would wait until they had a few cocktails. And they'd go up with this big box, and they would always leave with handfuls of cash. There were some incredible lessons from those summers that we had. One was about marketing, people understanding that they had golf balls, so they would sometimes sit out on the golf course and make sure that people knew. And then what happened is a lot of the members would actually come to our front door before they had a round of golf, and they had customers actually coming to them. The second thing is they went up to the guys that picked the range, and they would bring all the golf balls up there, and those guys would clean them in where they clean all the range balls. So they actually sped up the labor and the time it would take to actually clean the balls. Then they figured out how to sell them more in bulk, so they were getting more money. Each year, these kids would make thousands of dollars. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but for an 8 or 10-year-old kid, it's a lot. And so then I would keep it all in a jar. At the end of the year, I said, you can have half the money, but the other half of the money needs to invest in the next business. So they got to walk away with, say, $1,500. Then the next $1,500, they actually rolled into the next business, which turned into what was called duct tape wallets, which they found on the internet. I totally let them figure that out, but they went on the internet and they found a way to make actual real wallets out of duct tape. And so we went to Home Depot, we bought all the duct tape, bought all the X-Acto knives, bought all the rulers, and bought all that stuff, and they started making wallets. And they only spent like $300 or $400 in product, and they sold it for $20 each. So I said, all you have to do is sell 15 of these wallets, and you're now back to break even. You're now financially free from your initial investment. All of these things that you can do is fun, and you just keep pushing it back on the kids. But the way kids learn is by doing. The way kids learn is by actually having real businesses. And I'll tell you one really funny story that happened. The kids were making so much money that the neighbor kid was getting a little bit jealous. And so he started to weasel in on my two boys. And so my older son came to me and he said, hey, Dad, so-and-so wants in on the business. And by the way, Cade, which is my younger son, isn't pulling his weight. So what happened, just like in life, another partner started to come in and try to take out another one. And so I had to have a conversation with my two kids. I said, you can't fire your brother. And so it's interesting how when people start to make money and businesses start to come together, you have real things happen, just like that example. And those are great learning opportunities to be able to sit down with your kids. As an adult, you can laugh at it over a cocktail with other people. But at the end of the day, whenever you start to make money, more and more people come out of the woodwork and you have more and more problems. And it's really fun to do it when the kids are 8 and 10 years old. Not to mention the fact when you have an 8-year-old kid walking around with $1,000 in his pocket, their confidence level goes up and they start to believe that they can pretty much do anything. And so these are all the things what I mean by starting a business. And so now, fast forward, my kids, of course, are entrepreneurial. They started doing these same things when they went to college. They started to buy Beats headphones and sell them in bulk. They started to do iPhone screen repairs and those kinds of things at $50, $75, $100 a pop. So they start to do things just to generate the money that they need, depending on where they are. So they're lifelong skills that they learned that all started at the very beginning, from showing them what I'm doing, playing the cash flow game, working in the barter part so they can see that they don't actually need their own money. And then of course at the end, how it all works when it all comes together and that they can put a lot of cash into their pockets. I've been in business now for over 33 years. I have over 300 employees and over 10,000 apartment units. I just made a video on my biggest business mistakes that you guys can learn from, and you can watch that here.